I am Bill from CJ Pony Parts. The 2005 Mustang was an immediate success with enthusiasts because people love the retro look, but it was actually more to it than that. This car was completely redesigned from the ground up with a new chassis and a new engine, the 3-valve. The 3-valve made 300 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque stock, which is a lot more than the outgoing 2-valve was in the GT. Now, a lot of people, including us here at CJ's, went plenty fast with the 3-valve engine, but unfortunately for the 3-valve, in 2011, Ford launched the now iconic Coyote engine, and the 3-valve was kind of forgotten about. Now, the 3-valve is still an excellent value. These cars are very affordable, they sound great, and you can still make power with them. If you have a 3-valve engine or are looking to make some more horsepower and keep up with the Coyote crowd, there's one easy way to do so, and that's boost. So today we're going to install this Roush Phase 1 Supercharger on this 2007 Mustang GT. This Roush R2300 Supercharger kit is going to fit your 2005 through 2009 Mustang GT with a manual transmission and will take you from 300 horsepower all the way to 475 and from 320 pound-feet of torque all the way to 435. Roush provides all the parts necessary for an OE quality installation, but the base of it is this Eaton R2300 Supercharger kit. Again, this is a direct replacement for your factory intake manifold. It's going to include the injectors, intercooler, throttle body, and everything else needed for installation. This installation, like many others, is going to require a well-stocked toolbox. There's no real specialty tools required, but there is some grinding necessary. There's going to be some drilling, some wiring, and you also need a good set of basic hand tools. Before we get to disassembly to remove the parts that we don't need to install a supercharger, we're going to depressurize the fuel system. We want to do that before we actually take it apart so fuel doesn't spray everywhere. To do that, we're going to remove the fuse and then basically run the car until it dies. The reason we're doing that first is because we have to remove the computer and send it out to Roush. If you're installing this yourself, the computer has to be sent back to Roush with a voucher included in your kit. They're going to charge you $100 to reflash the computer with the Roush tune. Now, I know you just bought the Supercharger kit, now you got to spend that money too. $100 for a tune is actually pretty cheap. And like I said, you want to send the computer out to them, so the first thing you want to do is remove it once you depressurize the fuel system. Now, depressurizing the fuel system is very easy. We're going to remove this small fuse right here. This is location 41. Remove that. That's the fuel pump module. And what we do now is just start the car and then run it until it dies and the system will be depressurized. Now we're going to remove both terminals from the battery so we can disconnect it and then remove the battery from the car, followed by the battery tray. With the battery out of the way, now we're going to remove the computer so we can send it to Roush to get it reflashed. Computer out of the car, now we can actually start on disassembly. The first thing we're going to do though is remove all the aftermarket parts that are going to be in the way, such as the strut tower brace and obviously the cold air kit. But once the stuff's out of the way, we're going to move on to putting the car up in the air and draining the radiator. Now we connect the hose so we can drain the radiator. With the coolant drain, now we're going to disconnect all the electrical fittings to the throttle body, intake manifold, and then also disconnect the fuel line. Now, even though we depressurize the system, there will be a little bit of fuel, so put a little towel underneath the fuel line when you disconnect it. We're also going to disconnect the fuel injectors and the coils. We're almost ready to get the intake manifold off, but before that, we got to remove the bolts for the fuel rails. Now we're going to move to the back of the intake and again just disconnect everything attached to the intake so we can remove it. All right, now we can remove the fuel rail. Just give it a little bit of a wiggle. The injector O-rings will pop out. Make sure the rings are still on the injectors. Now we're ready to remove the intake. And once you get the outside bolts, don't forget there's actually two in the middle that are somewhat hidden. Okay, with the bolts off, now we can remove the manifold. Now with the intake off, we're just going to basically clean the area on the top of the heads here. You see a little bit of buildup sometimes on there. Just want to clean it up a little bit before we install our new Roush Supercharger. With it cleaned up, what we're going to do now is put a little bit of tape over the ports for the heads, just because you want to make sure you don't get anything in there during the assembly process before we install the Supercharger. Now you want to use a 1/2-inch breaker bar or ratchet to take the tension off the belt tensioner, so you can remove the belt and then the alternator. The kit will come with a new belt since it's a one belt system, so the old belt you can throw aside. Get the alternator off, we'll start by taking off the upper bracket. And then there's two more bolts here in the front. All right, now we're disconnect the crossover tube, the heater hose, and the upper radiator hose. You definitely want a towel for this, you will get a little coolant in the engine. The other heater hose fittings are in the back of the passenger side cylinder head. What we're going to do is remove the clamps to disconnect the rubber hoses. There's a metal heater tube bracket that bolts to the head. We'll remove that next. All right, now the last part of the disassembly process is remove the belt tensioner. With disassembly completed, the next step in the installation process is modification. There's a few factory components we have to modify to work with our Roush Supercharger. There's some hoses we have to cut, some ends we have to change, a few wires we have to mess with. The passenger side cylinder head, the very front edge needs to be ground off. The biggest modification is the alternator. These tabs here cannot be used with a new mounting location, so these have to be carefully cut or ground off and smoothed out. When doing this, we'll make very careful not to get anything inside the alternator, as you can damage it. Next we're going to modify is the VMV hose right here. This actually went to the top of your intake. We're going to have to shorten this up, so we'll disconnect it down here. Simple little push button connector. All right, so we removed the split loom from this, and this is the hose that's underneath it. What we're going to do is measure 5 1/4 from the end here. The tape measure up for me. Now it'll tell us where to cut. Now we have to remove this fitting and reinstall on the hose. To do that, basically just put a slit in the side here. Put a little dab of WD-40 or lubricant on there, press that in. And then cut the split loom as well and reinstall it. The next modification is the brake booster hose. You're going to separate it at the T-fitting so we can make some modifications. All right, what we're going to do here is disconnect this hose from the T-fitting. We're going to get rid of this hose itself here. And this one here has to be shortened by 1 3/4 inches. Okay, so we're going to move this clip. We don't need that anymore. Okay, now the last modification of the brake booster hose, we're going to take just over 3 inches, 3.1 off this hose here. So the 3-inch piece of hose we just cut off is going to go on the T-fitting from the previous step, and then put that back on the hose we just cut. And the next modification now is to the hard heater hose. We're going to cut that to Roush's spec, then move on to the wiring. All right, to modify the wiring, basically the master and ECT split is right here. We have to strip the wire back, across this, and then back to this factory piece back here so we can modify it. Basically what we're doing is we have to move the IAT sensor. It's part of the mass air sensor on these cars. Because we're going boosted, it has to be separated and have its own sensor. There is a jumper harness included with the Roush kit. All right, what we're doing now is removing the 2 IAT sensor wires from the mass air harness. It's the gray wire and the gray with red. You're going to cut them off about 2 inches behind the tape section of the mass air and then pull them out of the harness back to just before the number 7 cylinder, and then we're going to put a new end on. All right, the 2 ends here, what we're going to do is put some shrink wrap on there just to make sure nothing actually affects the wire in the future. Basically shrink it up and just seal it on the end of the wire. While our kid's working on the wiring harness, this is the next thing we're going to have to modify. It's just the front edge of the cylinder head here. This template's going to be included in your instructions. Basically what we're doing, just this curved edge right here. Mark it with a template and then grind it off. This is what it should look like when it's finished. It should be a nice, smooth, like radius curve on the edge instead of the sharp point. Right, so here's what it actually looks like when it's finished. This is going to be our ACT, or air charge temperature sensor. This comes off the harness here. Then back here, we took this one here, which is going to be our electronic throttle control. The next thing we have to move is going to be the TPS, which is here. It has to be moved back here because the throttle body is going to be over here now. And what we're going to do here is actually strip back the harness, and then Roush includes extension wires we're going to solder on to make the harness reach where our new throttle body is going to be located. All right, with the modifications under the car, now we're going to begin assembly by taking our factory mass air sensor and putting it into our Roush tube along with the mounting bracket. Now you can put the air filter onto the inlet. You want to make sure that the metal strip that's in the filter is on the bottom, basically right where the bracket is. All right, now we're going to continue on the assembly process here. We're going to install this rubber grommet, this metal sleeve that's included in the kit, so we can continue to assemble the airbox and then move on to the fuel rails. All right, now we're going to assemble the fuel rails with our injectors. The kit comes with new clips as well. You want to make sure you put a little lubrication on the blue end of the injector when you're installing them. Now make sure when you install the injectors, you want to make sure the wiring harness plugs are facing the outside. With the fuel rail assembled, the next step now we're going to put the supercharger pulley on the supercharger. Make sure it is seated on the hub, use the supplied hardware, and torque it to between 8 and 12 Newton meters. We're using a strap wrench to hold the pulley while we torque them to spec. If you don't have something like this handy, you can wait until the belt is on the car and torque them then, just don't forget. All right, now the last step of the sub-assembly is to take the PCV hose and put it on the fitting on the fuel charging assembly, also known as the intercooler. All right, now we're back over on the car. We're going to start by mounting the coolant tank bottle for our intercooler. What you want to do is just put this on top of the radiator support and then mark the holes where you're going to drill. This does include a template you can cut out. We just found this is much easier. All right, now we're going to remove the 2 bolts that actually hold the fan shroud to the radiator. That way we can push it away and get the J-clips underneath to mount the coolant tank. Now, the tank's going to be held on by 2 pieces of hardware along with some double stick tape. So we're going to clean the surface of the tank and also of the radiator shroud, wherever the tape's going to go, to make sure it sticks in place when you mount it. Okay, with the coolant tank mounted, the next step is the actual heat exchanger. Now to install that, it's going to require removal of the front bumper. So we're going to start up here in the engine bay area by removing the cover for the radiator support and then the 2 bolts next to the headlights. And this car does have an aftermarket front bumper, but basically you're going to remove all the hardware in the wheel wells and the hardware underneath and remove the bumper cover. With the bumper off, we're ready to mount our heat exchanger. And what's going to happen is we're going to remove the factory hardware. And basically this is going to mount behind here with the supplied hardware. And we're going to connect the hose to each side to run up to the actual intercooler. Okay, now put the heat exchanger up over the bolts we just installed and hold it in place with the supplied nuts. Okay, with the heat exchanger mounted, the next step is the intercooler pump. Now this is included here, this template. What this is going to do is basically go right here. Then we're going to mark the holes with a center punch. Now we're going to start by drilling 2 pilot holes, and then we're going to drill these out to a 1/4 inch. The brackets get installed with J-clips. We'll put the J-clips on first. Now Roush's instructions are going to tell you they do include 1 bolt, and they tell you to use the bumper bolt for the second location. We're just going to use both bumper bolts to give it more of a uniform look. Now we're going to install this isolation pad. This is just a soft pad that goes between the bracket and the pump itself, just to give it a little bit more cushion. With the bracket installed, now we can install the pump. All right, now what we're going to do is connect this hose here to the inlet of the pump, then fish the other hose up top, and this will go from the pump up to the tank. Now the hose can connect to the bottom of the tank. You want to basically fish it up kind of the most efficient way possible. Make sure it's not kinked, make sure it isn't tight anywhere, because if this thing gets kinked up, it's going to make the car run hot and could damage the blower. Okay, with the hoses run, now we're going to move on to the wiring. We're going to pop the fuse box off, remove the main bolt, and then start fishing the wiring harness for the intercooler pump. The bolt's secure, now we're going to mount the fuse to the shock tower. Next, we want to fish the harness through the engine side of the fuse box, and then we're going to mount the relay. Next, we're going to ground the pump and then move on to the power wire. Next thing we need to do is work on this wire here, this harness. What we need to do is cut this back, and then the red wire here on the end with the yellow stripe, we're going to cut that, and that'll be our next connection point. All right, with the wiring harness fished over, now we can plug in the pump and ground it. Okay, with the intercooler pump done, now we're back on the engine. We're going to replace the factory tensioner with the one provided by Roush using the original hardware. So the next step in the process is to install spark plugs. Now if you have an 05 through early 08 considered the AA engine, you can install these auto lights that are included with the kit. If you do have the later one, the 08 and 09 engine, you're going to take the factory plugs out and then re-gap them according to the manual. Okay, with the spark plugs done, now we're going to move on to a couple adjustments we have to make before we can install the lower intake. First thing we're going to do is lubricate this up and then install the modified heater hose provided by Roush. We're finally ready for the lower intake, so we're going to remove the tape first from the cylinder heads, and then again give them another cleaning, make sure the surface is good before we install it. We're going to make sure all the wiring harnesses and everything is clear. I'll put the lower intake into place. We have some more work to do, so what we're just going to do is put 2 bolts in place just now to hold it in place before we install the rest of them later. So the reason we only installed 2 bolts is we have to put on the bracket for the alternator. Roush relocates the alternator up to the side. What we're going to do now though is just put this in place to line up all the bolts. Then we'll tighten down and install all the hardware for the lower intake, and then actually remove this bracket so we can install the supercharger head unit. Okay, so now we can install the bolts to hold the lower intake down. Now you're going to use all the supplied hardware except for this one here. In the back corner, you're going to use the original bolt with the stud because the retainer for the wiring harness will fit on that stud. What you want to do now is put all the bolts in hand tight as well, and then we're going to go back, and there's actually a specific sequence you want to torque them. We're going to torque the bolts to between 8 and 12 Newton meters, and basically you're going to use the design that comes from the manual, but pretty much it's start in the middle and work your way outward. There is a specific order you do want to follow. Okay, with the lower intake tightened down, we can remove the alternator bracket and prepare to install the supercharger head unit. Okay, now we're ready for the supercharger head unit itself. Our little dowels it'll line up on, make sure it's lined up. Give a little tap to seat it. Now we're installing provided hardware. So you can use bolts all the way around, except for these 2 back here, we'll take studs. Just like the lower intake, there's a sequence for tightening the bolts with the supercharger. You want to follow the sequence, but it's actually 3 separate stages. The first time you're going to follow the sequence to 10 Newton meters, and then 20, and then a third time tighten them to 30 Newton meters. Okay, with the blower on, now there's the PCV hose we installed earlier on the lower intake. We're going to connect that to the blower itself, and then move on to reinstalling the alternator bracket. Now Roush told us to install the pulley earlier. Now with the size of this pulley though, the bracket does get in the way. So what we're going to do is actually remove this stud down here to give us more room, and this bolt actually comes off. This is the other mounting point for the alternator bracket. Once the bolts are installed, you want to torque to 30 Newton meters. Okay, with the alternator bracket in place, now we can install the idler pulleys. Use a little bit of 520 motor oil to lubricate the hole so the O-rings slide in a little bit easier. Now we can install the fuel rails. Now on the driver's side, you're going to reinstall the factory hardware with the studs. Passenger side is going to do the Roush provided hardware. going to connect the vacuum hose now from this unit here down to this brass fitting on the lower intake. Okay, connect the smart charge harness over on the passenger side, then you're going to fish it basically through here behind the alternator bracket over to the driver's side. Okay, and while we're over on the passenger side, now we're going to reconnect the coils and the injectors. Make sure in coil 4 the harness goes over the coil and the plug goes on the outside. Now, the reason the harness is up here is this piece here is called a rear turret. What you want to do is push the harness down below this before it goes over to the other side. The TPS harness we broke out earlier is now going to basically fit between the driver's side fuel rail and the supercharger, and then the rear studs, the original wiring harnesses, the clips are going to go back on the studs. And once we're done that, then we can actually connect the injectors and the coils. And the ACT sensor that we modified earlier, we're going to route that under the fuel rail, then between injectors 6 and 7, and connect the sensor. And then finally, connect the IPTS sensor. Next wire we're going to fish is going to be the hot wire for the alternator. What we do is basically fish that over there between the front coil and the connector on top of the cam cover. Then we're going to fish it over to the passenger side. All right, so now we're going to continue to secure this wire. The next step is to remove a couple of screws from the cowl so we can move one of the grounds. We're going to replace the bolt with a longer bolt and use that to continue mounting this harness. We're going to fish the wire through the looped ground and bring it over to the passenger side. Roush provides an additional wire tie you're going to put on there to put on the bolt we just installed. They want to check the radius suppressors on both the driver and passenger side. They're mounted on studs right here. Just make sure there's plenty of clearance with the belt. In our case, we bent this little tab out of the way. Again, do the same thing on both sides. Just make sure they're not in the way. All right, with the wiring pretty much done on this side, now we can install the alternator. You're going to install the nut and bolt first, then slide the alternator over it. Again, this is for 05 to 08. 09 is specific. Follow the instructions provided by Roush. With the alternator bolted on the front, now we're going to put the rear bracket on and get everything tightened up into place. Now with the alternator mounted, now to route the belt. Now obviously this is a very large belt being a single belt system. Roush provides detailed instructions on the proper routing. This can take a little bit of time to get right, but just take your time and make sure everything is seated properly before you put tension on it. And the next step now is to prepare this heater hose for installation. This is going to go on the passenger side of the blower. So back over on the driver's side, we're going to connect our fuel line and then the throttle body adapter and the throttle body. Make sure the fuel line clicks. If it's not on all the way, as soon as you get pressure, you're going to blow the line off, get fuel everywhere. And before you install the throttle body adapter, make sure you install the O-rings that are included. With the throttle body mounted, now we can mount the PCV purge hose. This again is a piece supplied by Roush. Now we're back over the passenger side of the engine. We're going to install the hard lines and then the soft lines to the intercooler. Now we're going to connect the stock heater hose to the modified heater tube and then connect the two short hoses between the intercooler and the metal pipes we just installed. The last step back here is to take the stock heater hose from the firewall. We're going to fish it underneath the intercooler hoses and connect it to the heater hose and the lower intake. Now we're going to connect the hose that goes down to the heat exchanger to the lower fitting, and the upper one is going to go over to our tank. Now the final hose over on this side is going to be the upper radiator hose. Again, this is supplied by Roush and is specific to the kit. Now we're ready to start the beginning of the airbox installation over here. The first thing we're going to do though is remove this bolt up front here. This is actually going to hold the front of our airbox. All right, now we're going to install the airbox and air inlet tube using the hardware we just removed. All right, then the final connection up top here is the PCV fresh air tube. Going to go from the passenger side valve cover over to the intake. Okay, back over the passenger side. Now we're going to reinstall the battery tray, the battery, and then hook up our new power wire. Over the driver, so now we're going to install this modified vacuum hose. 90-degree fitting is going to go right here on the throttle body adapter. And the other end goes down here. Last step here is to install the modified brake booster hose. Now the small hose, we're going to fish it back over here. And it's connected to the top fitting on the supercharger bypass valve. On the other side, it's connected right here on the throttle body spacer. All right, at this point, the installation is pretty much finished. We're going to install the computer, top off the coolant, and then we can actually start it. We're just about ready to start it. The first thing to do though is turn the key on a couple times and make sure the intercooler pump is working, and also prime the fuel pump. And now that we verify the coolant is flowing, we can start it. Now with it running, you want to let it get up to temperature and then check everything for leaks. Okay, everything is working like it's supposed to. Now we can reinstall the front bumper, put the wheels on it, and take it for a test drive. All we're doing here basically is just taking a test drive, make sure everything feels right, make sure it runs fine, you know, there's no weird noises, doesn't overheat, nothing like that. Something you want to be careful with this kit, it's designed for premium fuel. Now the owner of this car, he dropped it off, He has it very low on gas, but there is still about a quarter tank of gas in it, and it's 87 octane. So before you take it out and beat on it and really do anything with it, you want to make sure that you get that gas out of there and fill up with premium. But if you do have 87 in the tank like this car does, you want to stay out of the boost. Don't put any kind of load on it. It's not worth risking your engine for it. So burn the fuel up, fill it up with 93 octane, some high octane fuel, at least 91, and go out and have some fun with it. Now, I've driven these kits before, and usually this kit with your, your manual transmission 3-valve, it's going to put you anywhere in like the 410 to 420 range at the rear tires, which plenty of horsepower to have fun. I mean, basically that's kind of the neighborhood of what your typical full bolt-on Coyote is going to make, intake, exhaust, header, or something like that. They usually make in the 420, 430 range, so you're going to be right in that neighborhood with the 3-valve with the Roush Supercharger on it. And keep in mind, this is the phase 1. Phase 2 is more boost, fuel pump. There's a couple other things added to it, but it'll make even more power if you're looking for that. A lot of people talk about, custom tunes, making more power with it. All those things are an option. To be honest with you, the Roush tunes, as I found with my 2015, are usually very good. They're on the conservative side, yes, but they make good power, and the drivability is excellent, which is definitely what you're looking for with a car like this. And if you're looking for the absolute maximum horsepower, sure, do the phase 2, turn it up, have some fun with it. But out of the box, this is a really, really nice setup for any 3-valve Mustang. One thing you gotta love about Roush is when the installation is finished, it looks OEM quality. And who doesn't love an extra 175 horsepower, which really woke this 2007 Mustang GT up. As far as the installation goes, figure roughly 8 to 10 hours. Take your time, follow this video, you'll be back on the road in no time.